Welcome to HardScript.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. It was 3:47 a.m. when I stopped checking the clock. By then, I already knew she wasn't coming home that night. The night had started like any other Friday. Emily said she was going out with the girls from work. Nothing unusual. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her purse, and was out the door before I could even ask what time she'd be back. I didn't think much of it. We'd been distant lately, but not enough to expect anything reckless. By midnight, I sent a text. No reply. At 1 a.m., I called. Straight to voicemail. By 2, I'd stopped pacing the living room and started making mental notes. Where she said she'd be, who she'd be with, how vague her plans were when she left. At 3, I opened the banking app. I saw charges that didn't fit the story. A high-end cocktail bar across town, a late-night diner in a neighborhood she never had a reason to visit. I didn't rage. I didn't panic. I sat in the dark, the glow from my phone the only light, and I made a decision. Tonight wasn't about confronting her. Tonight was about confirmation. When the sun started to bleed through the blinds, I heard the sound of a car door closing outside. I didn't move. She came in quietly, thinking I was still asleep, her heels in her hand, hair just messy enough to tell me she hadn't been alone. She paused in the hallway, like she was debating whether to peek into the bedroom. She didn't. She went straight to the shower. That was all I needed. While the water ran, I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand. The letter was short. 10 words. No anger, no explanation. I'm leaving. Good luck with your debts. I slid my house key onto the folded paper. By the time she stepped out of the bathroom, the kitchen was empty. My closet was stripped of my things. My phone was gone. The silence I left behind wasn't an accident. It was the first move in a plan I'd been building without even realizing it. Because the truth was, her staying out all night wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It was realizing she thought she could walk back in, pretend nothing happened, and still own the ground she stood on. She was about to learn what it feels like when that ground disappears beneath you. I knew exactly how it would unfold before it happened. The shower would end. She'd wrap herself in a towel, step into the kitchen for coffee, and see the envelope. She'd open it, expecting an apology or some dramatic plea. Instead, she'd read those 10 words. And for the first time in years, she'd realize she had no leverage left. From my new apartment, bare walls, secondhand furniture, no trace of her. I pictured it clearly. The sharp intake of breath, the sudden stillness, then the frantic shuffle as she reached for her phone to call me. The first call came at 7:22 a.m. I let it ring out. The second followed a minute later. Same result. By the fourth call, she switched to text. Where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny. I didn't respond. By 9 o'clock, the tone shifted. She wasn't asking anymore. She was demanding. She wanted to know what I meant by good luck with your debts. I didn't answer that either, but I knew she understood. Those credit cards she maxed out, all in her name. The personal loan she took without telling me, signed by her alone. I'd been quietly disentangling my finances for months, just in case. At 10:15, I got the message I'd been waiting for. You can't just walk away from this. But I could, and I had. By midday, the call stopped. I imagined her pacing the kitchen, replaying the last few months in her head, looking for a sign she missed. She'd find plenty, of course, but only in hindsight. The canceled joint account. The slow removal of my belongings from the house. The nights I stayed out later and later without explanation. I didn't disappear out of rage. I disappeared out of precision. Leaving wasn't the end of the plan, it was the beginning. That afternoon, I forwarded my mail to the new address and changed the passwords on every account that was still linked to me. I called my bank, my credit card companies, even the insurance provider. No access meant no access. Not for her, not for anyone. I didn't need her to read the letter twice to understand it. Those 10 words were the quiet equivalent of locking every door behind me and throwing the keys into the ocean. And while she was still in our old kitchen, holding that paper like it was a puzzle she could solve, I was already miles away, starting a life she wouldn't be part of. The first time she tried to find me, it was almost pathetic. 3 days had passed since the letter. I'd heard nothing that morning, no calls, no texts, so I assumed she was finally sitting with the reality of it. I was wrong. I walked into my usual coffee shop, the one 2 neighborhoods over where she never bothered to join me before, and there she was, sitting by the window, pretending to read, eyes flicking up every time the door opened. When she saw me, she straightened, like she'd rehearsed this moment in her head. I didn't slow my step. I ordered my coffee, waited in silence, and left without acknowledging her. In the reflection of the glass door, I caught the stunned stillness on her face, as if she couldn't process being ignored in public. That was the first attempt. The second came 2 days later at the gym. I was mid-set when I noticed her in the cardio section, talking to the front desk like she had a right to be there. When our eyes met, she started walking over. I racked the weights, grabbed my bag, and walked past her without a word. The sound of her calling my name followed me into the parking lot, but I didn't turn around. The third attempt was less direct. A mutual friend texted me out of nowhere, asking if I was okay and saying Emily had been worried. I knew the play. She wanted to use someone else to force a response. I told the friend I was fine, but that my personal life wasn't open for discussion. Message received. Her persistence wasn't surprising. She wasn't chasing me because she loved me. She was chasing because she couldn't stand the idea of being shut out. For years, she'd been the one controlling the pace, deciding when we talked, when we fought, when we made up. Now, she couldn't even get me to stand still long enough for a conversation. By the end of the week, she started pushing harder online. Subtle posts on social media, photos of dinners with friends, captions about new beginnings, all designed to catch my attention. I didn't bite. I had already unfollowed her, blocked her number, and scrubbed her from my digital life. The truth is, running into her wasn't inconvenient. It was part of the design. Every ignored glance, every silent exit, every blocked message was another brick in the wall she couldn't climb. And I knew something she didn't. The more she tried to force a reaction, the more obvious it would become that she had lost every ounce of influence over me. She thought this was a chase. It wasn't. It was me walking away in a straight line while she ran in circles, wearing herself down. When silence didn't work, she reached for the next weapon she knew, my reputation. It started small. A coworker pulled me aside after a meeting and said Emily had reached out to check on me. The way he phrased it told me everything. She wasn't checking on me. She was planting seeds, making sure people knew I had been going through things. A day later, I got a text from a mutual acquaintance I hadn't spoken to in months. She said Emily had mentioned our marriage troubles and that she hoped we could work things out. It was subtle, almost caring on the surface, but the subtext was loud. I was the one who left, so I must be the unstable one. By the end of the week, I'd heard from 3 different people, each repeating a slightly different version of events. In her story, she hadn't stayed out all night without telling me. She had been with friends, and I had overreacted. She hadn't drained our savings. She had been handling the bills while I checked out. The most telling part? She made sure every story painted her as the reasonable one. Calm, concerned, the victim of my sudden coldness. I didn't respond. Not to her. Not to them. I let the words hang in the air without defense. Because I knew something she didn't. The people who matter will see the truth without me having to say it. And the ones who believe her version? They were never on my side to begin with. Still, I made moves. Quiet ones. I unfollowed anyone who reposted her narratives. I locked down my accounts even tighter, restricted who could tag me in anything, cut off every line she might use to reach me indirectly. The one thing I didn't do was explain. That was the part she couldn't handle. Being painted as the reasonable one in public, but getting absolute nothing from me in private. No reaction, no argument, no confirmation that her campaign was getting under my skin. The truth was, she wasn't just trying to protect her image. She was trying to provoke me into breaking my silence, to drag me back into a dynamic where she could control the story by controlling my responses. But this wasn't her story anymore. And while she was busy playing to the audience, I was dismantling the stage she thought she stood on, one quiet move at a time. The smear campaign was supposed to be her counterattack. Instead, it was proof that she was running out of place. When her gossip didn't pull me back, she went for the one thing she thought could still hurt me: money. It began with a notification from my old bank, the one we used before I separated my accounts. An attempted withdrawal from a joint savings account I had already emptied. I pictured her face when she saw the balance. 0. 2 days later, I got a call from my credit card company. Someone had tried to add herself as an authorized user to my new account. The rep asked if I recognized the name. I told them I did, and that under no circumstances was she to be given access. I added extra verification layers to every account I had. Her next move was more aggressive. She tried to have utilities at the old house transferred into my name again, probably thinking she could stick me with overdue bills. What she didn't know was that I had already sent certified letters to every company, making it clear that I no longer resided there. The attempt bounced before it even reached me. I wasn't just blocking her moves, I was anticipating them. Months before I left, I had methodically shifted my finances into places she couldn't touch. Every joint asset was closed or liquidated. Every recurring payment we once shared was rerouted. I'd built a firewall she didn't even realize existed until she slammed into it. But the beauty of it wasn't just the protection, it was the silence. She had no idea how much I knew, no clue how many steps ahead I'd been. Every time she thought she'd found a weak spot, she discovered it had already been sealed. And while she was scrambling to dig through the wreckage of her failed plays, the debt she'd been hiding was still growing. Those maxed-out cards, the personal loan, the overdue property taxes, all in her name, all hers to manage now. I'd made sure of it. I imagined her late at night, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of bills, realizing I wasn't coming to rescue her this time. The same man she'd once counted on to fix every mess was now the one who'd left her holding every single one of them. The financial strike wasn't a surprise. It was predictable, and like every other move she'd made since I left, it wasn't about money. It was about control. But she was starting to learn something I'd decided weeks before. You can't bankrupt someone who's already paid in full and walked away. The first time she tried it, I was in the parking lot of my office building. I just stepped out of my car when I heard my name. She was walking fast, too fast, the sound of her heels sharp against the pavement. Before I could even respond, she was in front of me, blocking my path. She started talking like we were in the middle of an argument I'd missed the first half of: accusations, questions, demands. I kept walking. She followed, her voice rising just enough for people in the lot to glance over. That was her goal. Not to talk, not to fix anything. To stage a scene where I was the one who looked cold, unresponsive, while she played the part of the desperate spouse trying to save what we had. I didn't give her the scene. I opened the office door, let it close behind me, and went straight to my desk. 10 minutes later, the receptionist told me she'd left. The second attempt was at a grocery store. I was checking out when she appeared behind me in line, pretending it was a coincidence. She made small talk loud enough for the cashier to hear, dropping phrases like, "Since you left," and "When are you coming back to the house?" I didn't turn around. I paid, took my bag, and walked out. Her third attempt was bolder. She showed up at the bar where I met friends on Fridays. I saw her before she saw me, lingering near the entrance. I slipped out the side door and left without finishing my drink. This was what desperation looked like when silence had stripped away her other tools. She couldn't get to me through friends. She couldn't get to me through money. So she tried to get to me through spectacle, forcing me into a public setting where my instinct to avoid a scene might pull me into a conversation. But the thing about public confrontations is that they only work if both people participate. I'd already decided I wouldn't. And every time she tried and failed, I saw it. The slight drop in her shoulders, the flicker in her eyes when she realized she hadn't even gotten close. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For years, she had been able to control the temperature of every argument. Raise it when she needed me to back down, lower it when she needed me to stay. Now, she could boil over in public, and I'd still walk away without even looking back. She wanted a scene. I gave her an empty stage. The first sign she was breaking came in the form of silence. Not mine, hers. After weeks of chasing me in public, trying to catch me off guard in front of other people, she seemed to vanish. No calls, no texts, no chance encounters. On the surface, it looked like she'd finally given up. But I knew better. Silence from her wasn't surrender, it was regrouping. One night, I came home to find a letter slipped under my apartment door. My name was written in her handwriting, the envelope slightly crumpled, like she'd debated whether to deliver it. Inside was a page filled with apologies, some vague, some oddly specific. She admitted she'd been distracted for months, that she'd taken my patience for granted. She said she missed us, but avoided saying she missed me. I didn't write back. A few days later, a mutual friend told me Emily had been asking questions, quietly this time. Not about where I was, but about who I was with. She was fishing for something she could use, but the tone had changed. There was no confidence in her voice, no assumption that she'd eventually get me to talk. Just a quiet frustration. That's when the smaller cracks began to show. She started liking old photos of us online, the kind from years ago when things were good. She posted cryptic quotes about loyalty and forgiveness, clearly aimed at me, but too vague for anyone else to call her out. She'd drive past places she knew I might be, not approaching, just watching from a distance. It wasn't an act anymore. It was the first time I'd seen her without a plan. One afternoon, I spotted her sitting alone in her car outside the coffee shop I frequented. She didn't come in. She just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. I walked past her without knocking on the window, but in that split second, I saw it in her face. She didn't know what to do next. And that was the shift. For the first time since I left, she wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't even pretending to be in control. She was simply uncertain. I could have gone to her then. Could have given her the conversation she'd been chasing for weeks. But I didn't. Because the truth was, this wasn't about fixing anything. This was about letting her feel exactly what I had felt. Powerless, shut out, left in the quiet with nothing but her own choices for company. The cracks were no longer just showing. They were spreading. When uncertainty took over, she began making mistakes. The first one came in the form of a late-night voicemail. Her voice was unsteady, almost slurred, not from alcohol, but from exhaustion. She said she just wanted to talk, that she was tired of this. She didn't sound angry anymore. She sounded like someone trying to keep a grip on something that was already gone. I didn't respond. 2 days later, she sent a long email. It was half apology, half accusation. She admitted to staying out that night with someone from work, but claimed it didn't mean anything. She said I'd overreacted by leaving, that relationships survive worse. Then came the line I'd been expecting. We can fix this if you just meet me halfway. But I wasn't meeting her anywhere. Not halfway, not a quarter. The real slip happened a week later. I got a call from an unknown number, and when I let it go to voicemail, I heard her boss's voice. He said she'd brought me up at work, something about trying to reconcile, and me avoiding her. That was when I realized her desperation was spilling into places it never should have reached. She wasn't just chasing me in her private life, she was pulling her professional life into it too. That's the thing about desperation, it makes people reckless. She was using every connection, every shared space, every fragile bridge we still had to try and pull me back. And every time, I let the rope go slack. The more she reached, the more obvious it became that she didn't have a plan anymore. She'd text me at random hours with half-finished thoughts. She'd, accidentally, bump into people she knew were in my circle, dropping my name in conversation as if that might get back to me. She was burning through her own dignity without realizing it. One night, I passed her in the parking lot of a restaurant I'd just left. She rolled her window down and called out to me. I didn't stop. I didn't even look. I just kept walking to my car. The silence between her last word and the sound of my engine starting felt heavier than anything we'd ever said to each other. And that's when I knew the final stage was close. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying not to lose completely. The irony was, that fight was already over. It happened on a cold Thursday evening. I was leaving the office when I saw her sitting on the hood of her car across the street. She wasn't pretending to be busy or scrolling through her phone. She was just staring at me. I walked to my truck without a word. She slid off the hood and crossed the street. Her steps were slow this time. No heels clicking, no forced urgency. When she stopped in front of me, there was no performance left. Her voice was low. She said she couldn't do this anymore. That the silence was worse than if we were screaming at each other every night. She admitted she'd made mistakes, plural, and that she'd thought she could pull me back the way she always had before. But she couldn't. For a moment, I almost believed she understood. But then came the part I'd heard 100 times in our years together, the pivot. She started to tell me why I was also at fault, how I'd changed, how I'd given up too quickly. The cracks I'd seen forming in her composure snapped wide open, and all the old patterns spilled out. That was my confirmation. This wasn't about rebuilding anything. It was about regaining control. And control was the one thing I'd taken from her completely. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even look at her when she asked if we could go somewhere to talk. I unlocked my truck, got in, and closed the door. Through the windshield, I saw her mouth moving, but the words didn't matter anymore. She stayed there until I started the engine. Only then did she step back, hands at her sides, watching as I pulled away. That was the real breaking point. Not when she realized I was gone, but when she understood I wasn't coming back. Not because I hated her, not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd already built a life where she didn't exist. By the time I reached the next intersection, her car was just a speck in the rearview mirror. And for the first time since the night she didn't come home, I felt the weight lift completely. The final move was already set. All that was left was to make it permanent. The last step wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was surgical. That weekend, I drove to the old house one last time, not to see her, but to collect what little I had left there. A few tools in the garage, a box of winter clothes, some old photographs I didn't care much about, but didn't want in her hands. I arrived early, before the sun came up. The street was silent, every porch dark. I unlocked the side gate, slipped into the garage, and moved quickly. 10 minutes later, everything I owned was in the back of my truck. Before I left, I walked through the kitchen. The place was colder than I remembered. She'd changed the furniture, repainted the walls, but it didn't matter. It still felt hollow. I left the keys on the counter, beside a plain white envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. No greeting. No signature. Just 6 words. There's nothing left to come back to. That was the last thing I ever gave her. From there, I went to the county clerk's office and filed the final set of divorce papers I'd been holding on to. I made sure the delivery was set to her workplace, not her home. She liked an audience, so I gave her one for the end. By midday, I had a new phone plan under a new number. Every possible thread that could lead her back to me was cut. No more social media. No more mutual friends in my contact list. No more traces. And when the silence came that night, it wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. Final. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. It wasn't about winning. It was about walking away intact. About ending something on my terms for the first time in years. I knew she'd read that note in the kitchen. I knew she'd stand there, holding it the same way she'd once held my first letter, the one that started all of this. And I knew it would hit her the same way, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. No anger. No plea. No room for interpretation. She had wanted the last word. But I had given her something stronger, no word at all. And in that silence, she'd finally hear the truth I'd been living since the night I left. I wasn't lost. I was free. Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe. This is where we talk about what doesn't get forgiven.